Good evening and welcome to the Queer Vegan Roundtable featuring Michelle Carrera, Namita Money, Micah Behan, Lorikim Alexander, Christopher Sebastian, and S.A. Bachman, moderated by me, Patrice Jones of Vine Sanctuary. This program is part of our Pride Month panoply of events associated with the Pride Month Vegan Challenge. If you happen to live in New England or thereabouts, you might be interested in attending Rainbow Palooza here in Springfield, Vermont on the 24th from noon to 5 p.m. So far as I know, the world's first combined Pride and Veg Fest, and it's going to be fabulous. But what we're here to do tonight is talk. So first, let me introduce our guests. There we go. Lorikim Alexander is and wave when I'm introducing you. Lorikim Alexander is an educator, organizer, biologist, conservationist, abolitionist, naturalist, and healer. She synergizes all of these into Black liberation work from a queer vegan perspective. Her central work is building the Cipher, a Black, trans, and queer femme-led QT BIPOC formation dedicated to total liberation. Next, S.A. Bachman is a wave essay.
Oh, sorry.
Is a socially engaged artist, advocate, and educator. She's the co-founder of two artist collaboratives, Think Again and Louder Than Words. Christopher Sebastian may need no introduction, but I'm going to introduce him anyway. Journalist, technical writer, and adjunct lecturer. He teaches in the School of Journalism, Media, and Visual Arts at Anglo-American University in Prague. He writes about food, politics, media, pop culture, and, of course, animals. Now, the next three people did not send me a bio, and so they are at my mercy in terms of what I choose to say about them. Michelle Carrera is a co-founder, along with her son Ali, of the fabulous Chilies on Wheels, and also a founder of Casa Vegana de la Comunidad in Puerto Rico, and project manager and volunteer coordinator here at Vine Sanctuary, an expert on mutual aid, and you can tune into one of our episodes of our podcast In Context to hear Michelle talking about mutual aid. Namita Money has either volunteered or worked for numerous sanctuaries and has been up here to Vine to volunteer several times, currently works at a fabulous anti-racist organization in Washington, D.C., the name of which I do not know.
It's the Equity Lab.
Perfect. And Micah Behan began volunteering for an animal sanctuary in middle school at Indra Loka Sanctuary, and is our newest staff member here at Vine Sanctuary, where he's on the animal care team. Yay, such a wonderful group of people. So here's the thing. When I started, so I didn't become vegan until I was almost 40. I stopped eating meat when I was 15, same year as I quit, same year as I came out in the 1970s. And those two things were profoundly linked, even though I didn't really realize it at the time, but they both were about being really true to my own heart's desire rather than what the dominant culture said. But I wasn't vegan until much later. And when I did start hanging out with vegans, one thing that I noticed was I was sitting at a dinner of vegan activists in Italy, and they were swapping stories about how and why and when they became vegan. And suddenly I thought, whoa, this sounds so much like queer activists swapping coming out stories with each other. It was just really striking to me. So I thought I would ask our roundtable to lead us off by telling us what's your vegan origin story, or in the case of Christopher Sebastian, your villain origin story. Who wants to start us off?
I can start us off. I was 21 years old, and I lived in Puerto Rico at the time. And my sister, very young, very much younger than I am. And for school, she was in an elementary school. For Easter, they gave her a little baby chick to take home. I don't know if he was colored or not, like pink or something, but she got to take him home. And he became part of our family. We were taking care of him, making sure stayed alive, and became a rooster who promptly took over the backyard with our avocado trees. And I remember I would come home from college and go over to the backyard and call him, like, mi pollita linda. He would come, he would like hurry out to the gate to come and see me. And there was something about that relationship that we formed that like made me see him, like I really saw him as a person. And I think that's also very, very connected to queerness also, because it's like our ability to see each other, like beyond what we're told to see, and also the ability to see ourselves in ways, I had not come out yet. So it took me a little bit longer to see myself in that same kind of way. So anyway, I went vegan right after.
Do you think that really seeing him was part of the process of really seeing yourself eventually?
I think so. I think it's just that, right? Because at the time, what's the narrative of how you see other people or how you see, anyone else is what they've been telling you, like this kind of mainstream straight cishet narrative. And I absolutely think those things are linked together, like that seeing outside of that. And it might just be that it was apparent first with the rooster and then later with myself, but it was still the case.
I'll go. So growing up, my grandfather was a butcher, and I have vivid memories of the so-called meat locker, including that he thought it was fun to close the door on us in there for a few minutes and play some form of hide and seek. He thought it was. So that stayed with me forever. And I was a vegetarian for most of my adult life. In my art practice, my collaborator and I created a few works addressing the ethics of meat, but it wasn't till about 10 years ago when I made a new dear friend that I was educated about the cruelty of the egg and dairy industry. And boy, did I feel like an idiot, truly. I went vegan. And at the get-go, the way it related to my queerness was a feeling of being in my own skin, or a feeling of putting on an old sweater. I felt like I'd landed home. Come on, Lorikim.
Yeah, I saw you smiling, Lorikim. I think it's time for you to talk.
Oh, I just love that. That idea of being home, and I really think that resonates with me as well, because I had left my home to come to this country, and I'd only been in this country a year, and I did all the things, and so in my country we'd say like, oh, I just broke out of the mold, right? And actually, until this moment, I don't think I thought about it before, whether I came out first or I went vegan first, but I came out first. and then I went vegetarian. And coming out, as a Black person in the world is quite a feat in itself. But as a 14-year-old who's just freshly immigrated to the United States in 1990, and at that time, I identified as a little Black girl. Well, not so little, I was always tall. But, I fell in love with my friend in math class. And, I was like, oh, she's so pretty. And yeah, that became my first girlfriend. And then, I started to just go to all these spaces I'd never thought I could possibly enter, like the peers, where just queer folk had taken over the night, trans and queer folks just being our most glorious selves, clothes and no clothes, impromptu parties on the sidewalk, voguing the house down, ain't no house, right? I mean, all of it. And that led me to a lot of realizations. And I'd always felt very, very connected with other animals in the world. I grew up by myself, an only child, and my friends were the animals outside. So ants and grasshoppers. I had a lizard friend I used to hang out with. And so when I found out about the fact that there was other people who thought like me, not only was this whole movement for animal liberation, right? But I did not have to eat meat. Like it wasn't a requirement in life. I was, oh, I can stop this immediately, And so I felt fully myself at that point, but I was vegetarian because I didn't really understand veganism well. And here I am, like kind of growing in the movement as this teenager. And then, folks kept saying to me, like, well, maybe you should read this, and maybe you should read this, And so I read this one article about the dairy industry and lost my mind. And immediately I decided, nope, that's it. I'm going vegan. And I did. And that's the same way I went vegetarian too, much to my mother's dismay and disgust, because she thought I was going to die because I didn't eat much anyway. And yeah, so here I am, fully out, fully dyky, and absolutely vegan.
I just want to say, if anyone was entranced by hearing about Lorikim's early friendships with ants, Lorikim was the guest on the most recent episode of our podcast, In Context, and there we get to hear a whole lot more about conversations with ants, and I think lizards as well. So you definitely want to tune in to that. Who's next?
I'll go. So I had first gone vegetarian when I was 8. I remember very vividly being in a McDonald's drive-thru. My favorite toy at the time was a stuffed chicken. And when my parents ordered chicken nuggets, I had this immediate, oh, wait, moment. So completely cut off meat from like that instant forward. Going vegan took like another like couple years. I think that was more in my early teen years, like 15 or 16. I think as I got older, similar with other people doing more research on the dairy and egg industry, like vegetarian was very much gut instinct, whereas vegan was a more logical and pragmatic decision. Around that time, I had also been really interested in just studying like how does the food we eat get to our plates and how does that impact the world around us? Same time, I started volunteering at Indraloka Animal Sanctuary. In terms of how it relates to my queerness, not directly, I don't think, but I will say, like, I did not live in a town or go to a school that was super understanding of LGBT people. I think I was one of the first people even openly out at my school. So that really led to a lot of mental health struggles. And I think taking action in a movement that I felt really passionate about was sort of just an outlet for me to, you know, feel safe in my own skin and kind of get out of my own head a lot of the time.
And did you feel safe being yourself at the sanctuary where you volunteered at Interlocal?
Absolutely.
Mhm. Does Nam or Christopher have anything they want to say? Yes?
I can go. Oh, Christopher, did you want to go next? All right. I guess I'll go. I was actually raised vegetarian by my parents. At the time, I didn't understand the reasons necessarily why. Like, I really did think they were related to the religion that I was raised with, which was Hinduism. But now I understand the relationship between vegetarianism and Hinduism in this like South Asian context being really deeply connected to upholding casteism and caste-based hierarchies, especially with the idea of purity and versus like polluting your body. So that understanding and that whole journey really happened a lot later than when I went vegan itself, which was in high school. I went vegan because I just always felt really deeply connected to animals. For the longest time, like I really wanted to work in, as a 5-year-old, I wanted to be a vet, and then it transitioned to like other areas of like animal protection. And so I was basically running like the animal welfare club in high school. And one day, actually, Joe, my sibling, who is also listening in here, called me up from undergrad. And I was in high school at the time. And they were just they saw the movie Food Inc., I think. And so they were like, did you know about like the dairy industry? Like you have to learn about it. We need to go vegan, basically. So I did a little research shortly after we both went vegan together. And we basically have been each other's vegan community since then. And I also have to say, like in high school, I didn't have a concept of queerness at all. Like that was not visible. So I really didn't come to terms with my queerness actually till working in sanctuary. So when I went to college, I had the privilege of like having 2 very local like vegan animal sanctuaries nearby. And both of them, either like the primary caretakers or like the owners, were queer. And so through like being in relationship with the sanctuaries, sorry, that was my dog. Through being in relationship with the sanctuaries and the animals there and the humans who were taking care of them, I slowly sort of began to understand my own queerness as well.
I'm hearing a lot of rhyming among these stories. Christopher, shall we skip you or
No, I can go. Like I had opted out of answering like how did I go vegan because I answer that question like a lot. And because I've answered it so many times, it almost feels like automatic for me. And I don't want to do that. I don't want to recite a story rather than like tell things in what feels to me like a more authentic way. So Patrice offered me the option to tell my villain story or my villain origin story, which is also fun. But then I realized, oh, I don't know which one to choose because I have a lot of them. I think that it's just like it's not one villain origin story. I think that it's just a continuation over and over again, because it's more of a series of revelations, a continuing series of revelations of how like inequality is just built into the systems that we live under, and I hate it. And veganism was just one of those stops along the way. Like I could go all the way back to high school as soon as it's like, oh, everything is terrible and it's incumbent upon us to make it better. And like, I didn't realize that. And I realize it a little bit more every day. And I think that the latest one, which is probably like, you know, the best way to do it, is just like our collective community response to COVID, because it has been absolutely abysmal. It continues to be abysmal. And just dealing with the recognition that like we are like ableism is just like so bad. And like, you know, and it's not even just putting it off on other people, but I think that like what bothers me is like, you know, the deep recognition of like how deeply I have been complicit in that as well. And like, you know, and realizing it and trying to make it right. And like, you know, and confronting that in myself in addition to talking about it with other people. And so like my commitment to evil, if you will, in the like anti-Justice League, if we're approaching it from the perspective of a villain story, is just reinvigorated or reignited. And like, yeah, so like it continues. I'll have a different one again tomorrow. But like, this has been the one that's bothering me the most in the past several months. And really it is related to my veganism and probably to my queerness, because it is just another extension of like the ways that like systemic inequality is like just baked in. And yeah, like that's really, if you will, what veganism was for me. And so Patrice got the vegan story anyway, just a different variation of it. I see what she did there.
I knew if you waited to the end, you'd have to tell us. But I'm really resonating with your disinclination to like to disentangle things that are actually quite entangled with each other, or to pull out well, you know, here's the vegan piece. I really resonate with that. But speaking of things that set us off on trajectories of evil, or let's just say resistance, or troublemaking, or whatever the case may be, we're in various ways among us, betwixt and between vegan spaces and queer spaces, and so I want to do a set of two questions, two rounds of questions that are related to this being vegan in queer spaces, being queer and committed to social justice in vegan spaces. So round one is, what do you most want non-queer and or single issue vegans to understand?
I'll go, given that I spend my art life and my teaching life indoctrinating. I mean, it's simple. I want them to understand the disruptive potential of queer vegan praxis. And I want them to understand that both inside and outside of mainstream veganism. And queerness and veganism are two historically contested subject positions. I want others to understand how queer vegans have experienced and utilized these identities to resist heteronormativity. It's pretty simple.
I'll jump in by saying there's also really not any single issue problem out there. Like, because if you're vegan for treating animals with respect, what about the humans who work in agriculture? Like, slaughterhouses are one of the most dangerous places for a human being to work and have the most human rights violations. So if you're fighting to liberate animals from that setting, what about the people who have no choice but to work there?
I also like to say that queerness is an animal right. Like, it is a right of animals to be queer.
Mhm.
And so I think that vegans, I think that we need to expand vegans in the way that they think of animals as this monolithic, kind of straight, unchanging mass.
I love that. I was just thinking, as I was thinking about queering animal liberation and working on the next thing I'm writing about that I almost like to see, like if you really wanted to queer animal liberation, you would have to see various human liberations as like a subset of animal liberation, rather than animal liberation being something other than or separate from. But I think we're leading into the second question. But the way you just phrased that really made me think of that queerness is an animal right. Yeah. And one that so many non-human animals are denied, right? With all of the forced reproduction that underlies literally every animal exploiting industry. That's a right that most animals in captivity are denied.
And also the way that we talk about animals sometimes is too focused on their suffering. And a big part of queerness is joy, right? Like queer joy and the joy of animals who are allowed to be queer.
I'm just about to say some wild shit right now.
Oh, go ahead.
The world is queer. I'll say it again. The world is queer. Earth is queer. There is no way to possibly be one specific. I did say what I say. There's no way for Earth to not be queer and come up with this much biodiversity. There's 10 tons of fun on the world for a reason, right? Like when we think of queerness, we think of a lot of times what has been turned into queerness, what queerness has become based on heteronormativity, and what queerness is thought of, not what queerness actually is, And so if you look at what is possible in the world, that, there are species out there that can grow back limbs, that there are species out there that can absolutely become themselves, give birth to themselves, okay? There are species out there that are both genders. There are species out there that defy gender, including humans, right? There's these constructs that were brought about by people who were confused. They were confused and they needed a reason. So they made things like, regular, degular animals and people and life into math. Those don't happen together, right? Yes, fractals can, are like an equation, and that makes something beautiful. And life can be quantified, yes. However, the real crux of everything and our soul is queer. And that's all I said.
And I love the joy with which you said that, even though you're like arguing against people, like nonetheless, the irrepressible delight in the queerness of it all still came through in how you were talking. And that links back to what Michelle was saying about queerness being about joy. Love this.
Yeah, I also wanted to add, I think queerness and not like social justice oriented veganism, they're both about like radically imagining the possibility of a world in which we don't have binaries, we don't have this like compartmentalization and people being put into boxes based on like what their bodies look like, and just like how, we're dictated by different hierarchies and things like that.
Christopher, I know you have some things that you would like the straight single issue, and isn't it, I mean, think of how those two phrases, straight and single issue, go together so nicely. Vegans, I know you have things. What's the most important thing you want them to understand?
Lorikim gave it all to us. I don't know what to say, except like, if I am talking to like vegan single issue advocates who are straight, I would say that like our homophobia and especially our transphobia that we have yet to confront it's getting in the way of our advocacy. And even if it didn't get in the way of our advocacy, which there are 100 different ways that it does, outlined by all of the people who have said incredible things before me, it doesn't help. It doesn't help. Like, and even if you like, got through or could rationalize away all of the ways that like that this bigotry gets in the way of our work, like it certainly does not aid in our work. And like we should definitely be able to talk about that in like, in a realistic and mature way. I hope that we do have better conversations. So.
Well, this was beautiful, and I am so glad that we recorded it so that I can type up a little transcript and start quoting folks. But now part 2. What is the most important thing that you want not yet vegan queers and social justice activists to understand?
This is one that I can probably answer more easily. And because I've given this one a lot of thought. And I wrote about it before too. Like when people are involved in like in human rights campaigning, especially around like, all of the political and social issues that we have in the United States, where I think most of us are from. Like, we are acutely aware of the dangers posed by nationalism, by Christian nationalism, by Christofascism. And one of the things that I think that is really interesting to observe about the way in which, like, that ideology operates with queerness is that there's a huge intersection with like animal rights and animal liberation too. And what do I mean by that? Like, because as Lorikim so eloquently had pointed out, the world is super duper queer. Like it's all about that gay shit. And like, it stands in, as Michelle was saying, defiance of the types of bigoted, transphobic, homophobic ideologies that are espoused by these people, especially right now, because they are so over reliant on, quote, biology, which most of those people are twisting and misusing what they think of as biology anyway. But because the natural world and the other than human world is so very queer, there is a need, like a psychological and a physical need, to destroy the natural world, or to or to somehow diminish it, to destroy the other than human world, because it stands in defiance in all of its queerness. Because you can't argue biology when biology is literally looking at you in the face. You can't argue biology when male seahorses are giving birth. You can't argue biology when when reptiles are self-impregnating like the Virgin Mary. Like you can't argue biology when all of these things are happening in front of you. Your only hope is to is to discard it, disrupt it, destroy it, or or dismantle it in whatever ways possible, and or to control it. And I think that we see a lot of doing that through animal agribusiness, through through controlling reproduction, and through, as I learned from Pattrice, compulsory heterosexuality in in all animals. And so because it flies in the face of their ideology that they use as a cudgel, that is so important to live authentically in our queerness and to respect the bodily autonomy of other animals. And as long as we're not doing that or including that in our work, it means that our work is inauthentic and incomplete. And so I would urge people or invite people to take that into consideration and take the perspectives of and the rights of other animals into consideration when we are making our advocacy, or when we are doing our advocacy or performing in whatever ways that we are. Because to not do so, it is it's leaving important work on the table. It's actively, in worst cases, ignoring important work, because we want to protect our biases and bigotries against other animals.
How about a really obvious one that drives me insane? I'd like them to grasp that veganism is a philosophy, not just a diet. I mean, that is just, oh my Lord. And I feel like it's been shrouded in so much misconception and misunderstanding, much as queerness has been. And, in my mind, there's a shared nonconformity of queerness and veganism. And, other people have addressed this, but for me, it's very true that declaring one's veganism to the world can be compared to the act of coming out. And in some ways, for me, veganism was even more complex. So those really fundamental things are important to me. And I guess, lastly, just the obvious of both queerness and veganism resist patriarchy and heteronormativity.
One of our staff members here at Vine had her parents were much and remain much angrier about the veganism than the queerness. And her father actually came to her same-sex wedding, but refused to eat any of the vegan food.
Oh, gosh.
But other thoughts on what we would like, or what you would like folks who aren't yet vegan or not yet respecting the fullness of other animals to understand.
One interesting thing that I've heard when discussing with a friend who has done a lot of work in queer activism is that they said, like, oh, thinking about animal agriculture and industrial agriculture and factory farming is overwhelming to me, and I have other priorities. And it's like, I think the one thing I'd say to that is it's not impossible to include that in your thought practice. Like, even if it would be an ongoing process to be vegan, like, it's still important to think, people eat 3 times a day, every day for the most part. Like, that's a big part of your life, and thinking about how that affects the world around you should be a priority, because it does affect the world around you and the others on it.
I mean, another obvious one is that, we're not separate, and we can see that now from the fires, and I mean, that's pretty obvious, but I think a lot of people don't realize that, right? Like, all the harms that we are doing to non-human animals are coming right back to us, exponentially.
And as always, the most marginalized people are going to be hurt the worst.
Mhm.
Mhm.
I think also it's important to consider, like, when we think of the idea of social justice, that we also socialize with, like, non-human animals. Like, they are part of our world. Like, even though our society centers humans, like, that is not what our world is reduced to. And so when we really think about it like that, then you see all of the atrocities that are happening in so many different industries. And, like, how can you say that that's not important? Because they're part of our world just as much as the other human rights, social justice issues are.
I love this. So basically, you're expanding what social means.
Mhm.
You're saying, okay, yeah, you don't even have to add and animal rights, because you're saying the non-human animals are part of our social worlds, right? And that reminds me of a way that some ecofeminists, Lori Gruen for one, often talk about this, and Lori taught me to, and it's actually really helpful when I'm talking to leftists of various stripes, to say, look, you're already in relationship with other animals, and they are by the way relationships of power and control. Like, if there's an animal on your plate, that's a relationship. That's an existing relationship that you have, and it's probably a relationship that's not consistent with your values. You probably don't want your relationships with other animals to be relationships of power and control. But they are, and that sort of goes back to what Michael was saying about you're eating 3 times a day. These are existing relationships with other animals that you have. Mhm.
Personally, you know, the folks I work with, the folks my work is for, Black and Indigenous, trans and queer people who we are the most marginalized, right? And at the front line of the need for resilience when it comes to climate change and any other nasty child of colonization, right? And so when I talk to our folks, a lot of times, we have these conversations around, well, you know, I'm just going to get something to eat because I don't have food, right? Or thinking of the fact that that's going to make me look like something else, right? It's going to make me look poor if I decide that I don't want to have this, that, or the other thing. You know, these are cultural realities that have been taught to us. And so a lot of times when I talk to other folks in social justice settings, especially folks who are not queer, you know, I get this response, well, they killing us. Why would I care? You know, and that everyone has said basically the same thing that I'm about to say, which is there is no separation in that continuum. You know, we're gonna still be killed by this system unless we upend the entire system. Why are we leaving crumbs on the table? Why are we doing that? You know, SA, where you were saying that earlier, like there's these missed opportunities. So, you know, it's also easy to give people back. If we were talking about joy, easier to give people back our joy, our wholeness, our true selves when we're in interspecies space. Think about what happens when you hold something outdoors. There's a whole nother conversation happening there because we are in constant conversation with the rest of the world around us. When, you know, when say a dog walks into a space or a cat walks into a space, that's a whole nother conversation. And if folks get this opportunity to deepen this conversation, that we are even more connected to the struggle. We are even more resilient in the struggle, right? Just folks need to see that. And I would dare say that the issue why a lot of folks in social justice spaces who are not queer are in a space of denial is because of single issue spaces that have been shown to them when it comes to vegan spaces and information. That's where the misinformation has come from. And that is really dangerous.
I can't be the only one thinking this has been so rich, just such a rich conversation. And I have one more prepared question. We could just go on and on. I know all of us and all of it, we could just go on and on, but I'm being mindful of the time that you're donating to us today and mindful of the audience as well. So let's go to our final pre-planned question. Well, and then there will be one more. So this event is being sponsored by Vine Sanctuary. And so I guess the question that I have is, do you think that sanctuaries are important and valuable? And because we know that some of these single issue folks say they're not. So do you think that sanctuaries are important and valuable? And if so, how so?
Spending most of my life being at one, absolutely. That is, so many times I've heard people say that has been the thing that really made them make the connection between, you know, the decisions they were making with the food they bought and ate and how that affected the world around them. Like, it's a lot harder to kind of shut that part of your brain off when you're eating, say, like beef. Like, when you know a cow personally, it's so much harder to pretend like you don't know where the food you're eating comes from. And in terms of being a space that works in queer liberation, again, absolutely. How can you be at a place that's like advocating for compassion for everyone, including non-human animals, when you don't know how to be compassionate towards human beings.
I would also say that, you know, like sanctuaries are a practice for liberation. Like we're actively practicing what liberation and seeing what liberation could be, right? In the same way that like safe spaces are important for queer folk. And it's a chance where we get to like see each other, see ourselves, be in a relationship with one another, discover, you know, through those relationships, discover more about ourselves. Like and the residents at the sanctuary are doing the same. They're discovering who they are by being in relationship to other who are also in liberation. I don't know. I just find that kind of practice of being in a relationship with each other and finding ourselves, then like, who are we underneath, you know, what was put onto us.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's so important. For me personally, like I was really able to embrace my queerness through sanctuary, through working at sanctuaries. And I think that's the case for both non-human animals and a lot of queer humans. Like you really feel like liberated in a sense in those spaces, and it helps just like the healing process and being in community with each other, and yeah, sharing space, I think, in that way.
Also, it can be so hard to imagine what kinds of relationships non-human animals might form with us, as well as with members of their own and other species. And the sanctuary allows us to witness that and imagine. And I mean, the only area of my life where I'm not a cynic is as an educator. And I feel like the role sanctuaries play is central to prompting the political imagination. And I have to also just say that the opportunities that Vine offers to scholars to do research, to build community, to engage in dialogue via the book club or events like this, getting people out in the world, getting their voices out in the world by the podcast, that's just freaking fabulous. And something that's really important.
I'm just gonna echo what everyone else has said about I was involved in a conversation recently in which a person is pursuing a project on multi-species democracy, and what that can look like. And what everyone else has just been saying is is really what I feel like that project is about. Simply because all of us are talking about oh, we have to build a world without animal exploitation. And so we're concentrating on deconstructing what animal agribusiness is and what it does. And sanctuaries literally give us the template for what that world can look like. And the fact that so many people discard or disregard the importance of sanctuary and what it represents tells me it just tells me about how we feel about the collective disposability of individual lives, and how we've been so deeply damaged by the system that we're living in, the capitalist system that we're living in. And I can't imagine I can't imagine a world without sanctuaries, or I wouldn't want to, because of simply what the word sanctuary itself represents and what it is. It's literally a safe space. And that's that's for all of us, human and non-human, and like, you know, and it's just like I almost can't articulate like how I feel when I hear people say like, oh, sanctuaries like are this or that, or like, you know, not important, or they're not as important as, and then insert some other like, you know, aspect of animal or human liberation that like, you know, that is more important to them on an individual level. And I'm just like, that absolutely, that falls so flat for me. And like, and I really like, I really find it difficult to put into words, especially recorded words, like how like, you know, how enormously wrong-headed that feels to me, to approach any type of project of liberation from that way.
Absolutely. And I think I'm thinking of sanctuary in a very scientific way, right? Unfortunately, that's like the way my brain goes. A lot of times, I'm a scientist, right? And a lot of times, and in what I was taught as a scientist, you're taught that, thank you, that you're taught, you know, the individual does not matter, right? Oh, bye, Annie. The individual does not matter. It's not a, you know, there's nothing, the population is, as stability is what matters. Populations are populations of individuals, right? And so I think that this is where these people are coming from. And it's actually a denial of heart to me to say something like sanctuary doesn't matter, because there's no life that we have lived as the animals that we are that we have not had sanctuary. At some point, we have looked for sanctuary. Sanctuary can look like a vacation. It can look like a child's room with a door that closes. You know, it can look like being alone at the bus stop, whatever, you know? And so at what point are you saying that you are not, that you are liberating anyone? What that animal liberation has anything to do with anything in your heart when you say you want to deny somebody some sanctuary? That's very strange.
All right. Thank you for those reflections. Does before we open it up, any final thoughts from our roundtable panelists?
Only if Christian has a villain costume.
We know that he has several.
Okay, good.
I
I'm
do.
glad-
I can show to you though
Come
that
on.
I would
Hey.
be like, I would out myself. You all would be able to find me performing all kinds of nefarious acts. Be aware that there are a lot of costume changes.
All right. Well, I'm gonna go ahead then and say, before I take questions from the audience, I'm about to turn the recording off. So before I do, let me thank our roundtable participants: Michelle Carrera, Namita Money, Micah Behan, Lorikim Alexander, Christopher Sebastian, and S.A. Bachman for sharing their thoughts, their time, and their hearts, their queer hearts with us today. It's meant the world to me, and I'm so glad we were able to record it so that you who are watching in the future can enjoy it as well. This has been the Queer Vegan Roundtable, sponsored by Vine Sanctuary, which you can find at vinesanctuary.org.